This is Eddie Doherty for the DCC113 Workhouse Project. This is folder 1. Apologies for the video quality, my camera is having technical issues. This is just the brief, the marking criteria, the timetable. This is the forming, storming, norming and performing guidelines that I set up on our Google Drive. It's colour coded so people can add their own suggestions and comments. You can kind of see that I've put the most on this. Anya's put a little bit and then Elle put something, I think, but not very much. Thankfully we haven't really had to use this because we've been getting along very well as a group, but it's nice to have it in place. This is some emails that I got. First I sent to the Hampshire Local Archives about information on Laura Ridding. They have quite an extensive collection of letters and documents around her that have been donated from, I think it's the Lord Selborne. One of the Lord Selbornes donated it, but I found them in one of their articles that they'd written on Laura Ridding for the suffragettes. So I sent them an email asking if they had any information on her. They sent me back a very long email with catalogue descriptions of various articles they had, things that I can look up, ways to contact them, and other useful things. So they've been very, very helpful. I kind of wish that I had contacted them, maybe not sooner, but if I had gone a bit more in depth into contacting them. I didn't realise that I could request pictures of articles from their archives using the reference numbers. I thought you had to actually physically go there to see them, but apparently that's not the case, but I found that out a bit too late. This is the family tree of Laura Ridding that I made at the beginning of the project to help kind of get a good idea of her family and her life. Laura Ridding is just here, and there's her husband George, the first Bishop of Southall, her 3 sisters and her brother, and then her mother and father up there. There wasn't much information on her mother, or indeed any of her sisters really, but her brother was the 2nd Earl of Selborne, and I think he did a lot in World War I, so there's a bit of information there. This is the research links document that we set up in the Google Drive. Obviously you can't click on links in paper form, but just so you can see what we've used. So first section is a series of videos by a costumer called Angela Clayton, who made a 1890s inspired day dress, and it had a lot of good information about her pattern making, her research inspiration, and sort of her process. That's the Hampshire Archives and Local Studies article that I found, which I contacted them through. That's the Workhouse website. That's the archive records, specifically the scrapbook with our main reference photo in. There isn't actually a image, it's like a description, a catalogue description, but it's there. Then there's some basic information I found on Edwardian fashions, hats, and a little bit of history about their feathers. Then another one about basic info about hats, and then an article from The Guardian about Laura Ridding, which they had done also for the suffragette movement. Then we've got the research. So this is a picture from the Victorian and Edwardian fashions from La Mode Illustrée, edited by Joanne Olean. They're from 1890, but they're sort of starting to move into the sort of tailored suits for women fashions, which is quite interesting to see the shape and how the silhouette's changed, especially like the sleeves start out quite thin, then it got really, really puffy, and obviously how the jacket fits over the back of the bustle. Our thing doesn't have a bustle, but it's interesting to look at regardless. And then another picture from the same book, specifically looking at these two images here, with the collar shapes, what they're wearing underneath, how it's fastened up. Is sort of our main focus on that one. Then I've got a extract from the Keystone Jacket and Dress Cutter, which is another book I bought for this project, actually. It's a edited version of a book that was printed in 1895, specifically geared towards making tailored suits for women. I think they were called Keystone jackets, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But it's just got information on how that style of fashion came to be, what was typical for the suits of that time, why they were worn. It's got descriptions about the skirts specifically, so they were still floor length, despite the fact the outfit was designed to be more active. It says about the brush braid and the cording in the hem, which we used in our costume. Then it's also got a little bit of technical information about how it was constructed. And then also about the shirtwaists, which I had not come across before this project. So it's quite interesting to see what people thought of them at the time, what sort of were typical designs, and how they were received, which I think was very well on the whole, because they're more comfortable to wear. And I've got some more images from the Keystone jacket. So this one, it's got the bigger puffy sleeves, and it's got these sort of motifs down the front, which kind of reminds me a little bit of our jacket with the bodice in the front and everything. And then here I kind of like how you can see how wide the skirt gets to the bottom, which is quite invaluable for us because we don't know what the skirt looks like at all. It's also got the huge puffy sleeves again, and then it shows how the jacket finishes at the hem, which is another thing that we don't know about because we don't have it in the photo. This is another image from the same book, so it's another jacket, but there's also an example of a shirtwaist. So I don't know how they fit the puff sleeves inside the jacket, but they must have done somehow. And then again from the same book, some different examples of shirtwaists and bodices. So you can see different collar styles and types. And then this is from my all-time favourite book, Costume in Detail by Nancy Bradfield. So it's got a really in-depth drawings of existing clothing, which is why I really like it. Specifically this drawing here of how the shirtwaist, or how the front of the bodice fastens, will be really, really useful for doing our project because we have obviously the false front panel. We'll probably end up doing something very similar where we have to fasten it down one side or both sides, so it's cool to see it being used in practice. And then also there's a tiny little image there of a walking costume, which again has the same sort of, we've got the jacket, slightly less puffy sleeves, and we've got the different shape, and it's good because it's a little bit later, it's 1907, so yeah, it's a really good one. So then I've got my basic research about Laura Reading. So here is the photo that we are basing our work off. It's from the Hampshire Archives, from, I think their version of it is from a magazine clipping from 1912. So it's very, very close to the year that we're looking at. Excuse me. Because we're looking at 1918. So it's very, very likely that she would have still had this outfit in 1918. And she would have taken very good care of it, considering she's very wealthy, so there's no chance of it being too worn out to throw out or anything. She's not doing anything too strenuous. This is a watercolour I did of the costume as I imagined it. So at the beginning we all sort of looked at the photo and then we all went away and did our own drawings of it, what we thought it would be based on our research. So this is what I came up with. The only thing that I didn't realise was I'd made the shirtwaist white when actually in the picture it's a dark colour. So I should have paid more attention with that, but we saw it early, we recognised it early enough that we could rectify it in our patterns and fabric choices. But this is the design that we ended up going with. That I tried to do what I could see for the beading, but it's not very clear. And even in the picture it's very difficult to make out exactly what was happening with the beading there, but we tried very hard. Then we went to the Draper's records, so we looked at 1906 first. We had a look at hats, or this page is about hats, so it's about different hats and hairstyles at the time. This one seems quite fun. I think it's collapsible. In the description it's describing it as easily attached by buttons and easily unmounted and cleaned in the flat, so I'm assuming it's a sort of gimmicky collapsible hat. There's a lot of these like driving hats or mushroom hats, and they look very, very odd. And then there's all sorts of the basic types, different. There's another mushroom hat one. I don't really know how that works with having a head in it, but it's a very weird shape regardless. And this one in particular has nice examples of very elaborate shirtwaists as well, which is nice. Then we get on to the Featherbone. So Anya and I found the Featherbone advert. Firstly, we found this advert. We had no idea what Featherbone was at all until we found this advert. So we're assuming that it's like the cores of feathers that have been taken out and used as a replacement for like whalebone and things. I've seen references to lining, well, not lining, but boning jackets with featherbone. So I'm assuming it's just like an alternative to whalebone. The bias crinolet was, I'm assuming, is a sort of early version of horsehair braid that we get now, like the plastic one. So sort of give a wave. This one I think is the cording to help hold out the hem of the skirt. We found the patent for it online, which is quite interesting to read about. It's basically the cores of feathers layered over each other and then bound tightly with like a cotton thread to make a cord. But yeah, and then we have an example of an advert for the like removable frill for the inside of skirts. So because they were floor length, they would have got worn easily, they would have got dirty, muddy, and it's easier to have something removable on the inside that will catch the worst of the mud and the dirt that you could take out, wash, repair, put back in again, etc. So that was a fairly common thing for the era until skirts moved upwards and got shorter. Still in 1906, we've got examples of hats and clothing, so we've got some very elaborate blouses up there. We've got different types of skirts. We've got a fabric shop advert, and we've got the sort of very iconic S-shaped silhouette there. And then we've got some photos from various things from the Draper's records. Unfortunately, they're very, very difficult to see. This one is going to be a fashion plate, so it's not going to be necessarily what people wore at the time. It's just probably, it's more accurate because someone is wearing it, but it's still probably a tailor trying to, or seamstress trying to sell their wares and their fashion, so it's not necessarily accurate to what the time. I think this one was for a girls' school, so there's some slightly younger fashions. You can just about pick out different hats, but it's just a shame that they're so small because you can't really see. These are some other adverts from the time I found interesting. So there's a lot for P&S corsets. They were sort of marketed, or they seem to be marketed towards like average women and working women and active women. So this whole one here is targeting towards women teachers. They've got the whole thing on the tram, so like everyone takes the tram, everyone can wear P&S corsets, that kind of thing. And then there's also this advert down here, which I'm assuming is for a kind of like fabric of some kind. It's saying about, oh, it won't cockle or shrink, all sports and all climates. I'm assuming it's some kind of like fabric or some brand or something, but I have no idea what it is, and I haven't found reference to it anywhere else, which is a shame. Still in 1906, so I was looking at other adverts as well. So we have the hair nets, so it kind of gives an idea of the hairstyles from that time. Kind of interesting they were made with human hair, but yeah. We've got some little, like blouses and some frilly scarves and things. And then we've also got a bicycle advert, which probably wouldn't have been very often seen before this time, because women didn't really ride bicycles much. So it's sort of like really getting into the whole women being more active, more doing more sports, being more independent, and having the clothes adapt to fit that. Then we've got the 1913 Draper's records, so they're a little bit closer to the time period. These are all specifically for hats, I think we were looking for, because we wanted some from the time. So there's various different hats. That one's for like lace and net and stuff to go around the hats. And there's some more photos are becoming more common in these ones, which is nice. I've got some more here, so we've got like a hat cleaner, it's like a straw hat cleaner, which is nice. This advert here is has a lot of different hat shapes and things, which is nice. A lot of the same shapes coming up, and then we've got some more like stylized ones that I think are supposed to be selling specific things as opposed to actual hats. Some more hats. So this one in particular seems to be like you buy the base of the hat and then you buy the decorations to go on it. So in theory the hat will last longer because you can just remove and change out the decorations as you want, but the style of hat itself will be in fashion for a relatively long time. So that's sort of like a good for like less wealthy women who might not necessarily want to buy a new hat all the time. There seems to be a lot of adverts for like the blank hats that you can decorate yourself. There's this weird one here with like the sort of like mushroomy hat style again. I don't know. This is the only one that I've seen in this style, so I don't think it caught on very well. There's some more pictures. Not a bit clearer with the hats in the background, but it's more about hairstyles and things. And then there's also the hat lining. So the crowns of hats around this time seem to be huge, like really, really big, and it doesn't make sense that they wouldn't be flopping around all over the place, but this seems to be the answer to it. Whether this was like a common thing or if it's just like a brand thing or a gimmicky thing, I don't know, but if it's adjustable, then you can still have the same huge crown-sized hat, but have it not flop around all over your head when you're trying to wear it. So that's quite interesting. This is the main inspiration for our hat designs. So I found these images on Pinterest, but they seem to be from books from the time, but they're specifically targeted to women of 60, which Laura Reading would have been, and hats for tailored suits, which Laura Reading would have worn. So although they are American based, I wouldn't have thought that the fashions would be too different from each other. And I've seen a couple of other hat styles like these, so I'm not. We didn't think it was too out there to use, but these two other ones we specifically wanted to reference. So they seem to be quite a large crown with a big wide brim that goes straight up, and then not much decoration, but like one large decoration at the side. So that was our inspiration for the hat on there. This is the base for the technical drawings I used, and this was the technical drawing practice. So this was the only outfit that I managed to finish in the end because I had problems with the paper, which I'll talk about in a second. But I got a bit swept up in everything else, so I never actually went back and finished those other drawings. So this was the only one I had. This is the first attempt at this drawing. Basically, the layout paper ran out by the time I'd got to the table, so I used tracing paper instead, which was a big mistake because it made it go all smudgy. So you can see huge smudges around here when I tried to rub out, and then trying to fine line it was a huge nightmare because the ink was not drying, it was just sitting on top and beading and then smudging, so I had to give up on that. But I bought some of my own layout paper and I redid it and it came out a lot better, so I'm much more pleased with that. And then these are the technical drawings I did for our actual outfit. So that's the front of the jacket and the back, and then this is how I imagined the bodice front will go in. So I imagined it would be stitched to one side and then it would have hooks and loops alternating with snap fasteners just to make sure it actually is properly secure. So that was my thought on that one. And then we've got the skirt on the other side, so it's still got the darts in at the front, it's got the placket at the side back, and then it's got the box pleats inserted on each side. I did have one of the blouse bib, but that somehow got lost and I just haven't had the time to sit down and redo it, which is a shame. So although the bib we actually made ended up being very, very different from what we originally envisioned, so it's probably just as well. Then we've got the measurements that I took. I took the first set of measurements, so these are Elle's measurements all the way through without a corset on, and then we later went back when we decided we wanted a corset and retook the measurements that were relevant, and they're here, so we had those to reference. And then this is the measurement form that we used. Apparently it's new to this year, or whoever did that section gave this form instead, and I really don't like it, although there are some measurements that I hadn't thought of, like the half girth and the full girth and other things like that. I thought it was just too confusing to look at, let alone take measurements from, and there are a lot of measurements that are missing that I would normally take. So we ended up doing like a mashup of both, just to make sure that we have everything absolutely covered. We don't have to go back and redo it at a later time. This is the petticoat pattern we used. So it's the same pattern as the jacket. It's at 1/8 scale. It's from a book that Anya brought in, The Evolution of Fashion, Pattern and Cut from 1066 to 1930. It was a very, 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 very good book. So we traced it all out, and then scaling up the pattern Anya showed us how to do. So we photocopied, I cut out the little sections and then scaled them up from a point. So I would measure from the central point to, say, that point there, and then times it by 8, and then extend that line outwards by that much. And it should have gone fairly smoothly, but because I've not done that before and I get confused very, very easily and don't tend to do well with numbers, it took me a very, very long time. So I had a lot of different problems with scaling up and misreading numbers, and it was just not very fun at all. So I managed it in the end, but it just took a lot of practice and rechecking and measuring, and it just took a very long time. So although I feel confident I could do this for another pattern in the future, it's not my ideal preferred method of scaling up. And this is the skirt pattern, which Elle drafted out. So it was from a book called Edwardian Ladies Tailoring, the 20th Century System of Ladies Garment Cutting, 1910. It seems to be one of those books that's written for people who already have a technical knowledge of sewing, and can usually figure out what they're doing anyway. So Elle had a lot of different problems trying to actually get this to work, and I think a couple of the tutors had to go and help her as well, so I think Rachel helped her a lot with it. But she got it in the end, but it took a very, very long time, and it probably would have been better just to try drafting our own skirt pattern as opposed to this. But it is what it is, and it worked well for what we needed, so can't complain. This is the jacket pattern, which Anya scaled up. It's from the same book as the petticoat. It's the exact same pattern set as the petticoat as well, so it's like a complete outfit. So it's jacket, the skirt is there, which Anya included in case we wanted it, but we didn't actually use in the end, and the petticoat or the underskirt. So that was that. And I've got a couple of things for the pattern thing again. So we ended up adding box pleats into the skirt to match the box pleats on the back of the jacket. So there Anya has extended, or like split the pattern and then extended it outwards. And then she was trying to lay it out on the table to cut out, but the fabric wasn't wide enough, so she had to rejig it and figure out how to do that without having it in two pieces, because it's a one-piece skirt, or it should have been a one-piece skirt before I put the box pleats in. And then this is the first attempt at the bib pattern. So it's a bodice front, bodice pack, and the collar. This would have been, we ended up just scrapping this in the end because it didn't work as we wanted. It should have had elastic around the waist, but it just wasn't very comfortable, and we couldn't figure out, I think we didn't have enough of the cover fabric to justify it, so that had a lot of adjustments later on. These are the fabric samples. So obviously I went to Fabricland because that's my home fabric store. Still very loyal to Fabricland, and I went to see what they had. Bearing in mind they are a budget fabric wholesalers, so the quality of their fabric isn't particularly great. They don't tend to do things like wool or silks because it's a budget fabric shop. They do a lot of like polyesters and synthetic fabrics, and they're not always 100% on the content of the fabric, so I had to keep that in mind. Unfortunately they didn't have a lot in the way of suitings for the jacket. The only one that was relatively usable was the cotton velvet, but even then it's still quite thin and it's very expensive for the amount that we needed for it. So that was sort of a no-go in the end, but they did have tulle, which we needed for backing the beading motifs, so that we could work on them separately and not get in each other's way, because there's a lot of beading to do. So they had that, and there's a lot of it for very, very cheap, because it's about 3 meters wide and it's £2.99 a meter, and I still have my discount for 20%, so it's kind of a no-brainer to get the tulle from there. These are some more fabrics. So we have the white fabrics they had for the blouse bib. Again, there wasn't anything really suitable. There was viscose, which they had, which is this one up here, which is my preferred one, but it's not. We wanted something that was already sort of like crinkled, so that it would be easier to sew on. We didn't have to faff around. But the only one they had was this one, and it's sort of like shiny satin, and it just doesn't look right for the time period. Because they would have had like natural fabrics, they would have had cottons and wools and linens and muslins and very fine woven cloths, especially for someone of Laura's status. So they didn't have anything that was particularly usable. So, and there's some alternate fabrics that I'd picked up that I thought maybe we could use, but we didn't like at all. So they were just considerations. So these are from the Purfleet stores. So these are the ones that we originally went to first. This was back before we realised that the blouse bib was supposed to be black and not white, but we raided all the white fabrics first. So we've got various different cottons. We've got these ones, which we really, really loved. So it's sort of just got like a texture on it, but it's like in a sort of like crinkle stripe. So these were the sort of ones that I preferred. I had a bit of a, not argument, but a disagreement with Elle, because she really, really liked this one and this one. And I do like the texture on this one. I think it's perfect for what we wanted. But if we're pairing it with a navy, it's going to look really grubby and old and dirty, and just because it's cream, which we didn't want, because Laura's a very high-standing lady, and she wouldn't have had clothing that gross. So we wanted white with the navy. But we ended up, basically we resolved that by both of us going and looking for other alternative fabrics instead of trying to compromise on the actual fabric itself. So we found a compromise in the end, and sort of just worked through it and found alternatives which seemed to work very, very well. So yeah.